Today's webinar is going to be about call for systems change partners. This is a multi-year funding opportunity for nonprofits within the greater Cincinnati area. Many of you may be aware that United Way has not had a significant funding process open. We have been under 4-year commitments with currently funded partners that will be ending at the end of this year. So this is going to be opening up opportunities to receive 2 years worth of grant support. And those grants will begin in July 1st of 2022 and run for 2 years ending in June 30th of 2024. Some folks know sort of this, that in order that if you are funded through this process, you will be referred to as sort of this term agency partner. So for agency partners that are interested in continuing funding, you will need to participate in this to apply. It is a competitive process. And the first step of that process is called the letter of opportunity, which we'll talk much more, and we'll talk in greater depth today about that. Quick logistics, just an overview of what we'll be doing. We're going to talk a little bit about United Way for folks who may not know us as well. Really share our perspective on why we are taking a systems change approach. And then I'm going to get into the nitty gritty of the call for systems change partners, an overview of what the whole process will look like. And then we'll do a deeper dive into some of the key information you would likely want to know about eligibility, priority areas, and very specifically what that first step, the letter of opportunity, is going to look like. During this main presentation, it'll be about an hour worth of information. Participants will be muted, but you will be able to use the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on that to share any comments or questions you have. As we go through, we'll try to address them as we hit the material, and then can circle back on anything that we've missed at the end. We have typically had about 30 minutes worth of time at the end for conversation and other questions. And also at that time, you'll be able to raise your hand using the icon in order to be unmuted to share any questions or comments verbally. Sometimes figuring out how to type them into a concise question in a text box can be difficult. The other thing to note is for people who may be more comfortable providing questions in an anonymous fashion, the Q&A feature in Zoom, which you should see on your option bar at the either top of the screen or bottom of the screen, provides you the option to submit anonymous questions. So feel free to submit that way as well if that is more comfortable. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Mike Baker, to kick us off with an overview of United Way and sort of a perspective on why we are taking a systems change approach.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone, and good to be with you, even if just virtually. Again, my name is Mike Baker. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at United Way. As Amy mentioned, we are currently in the final year of a 4-year funding commitment to a current set of agency partners. So this is us opening up applications for future funding through a similar vehicle. That'll be for the next 2 years. So all organizations who are interested in receiving that funding from United Way and being considered an agency partner will need to apply through this process. Like I said, very end of a 4-year funding commitment. And 4 years is a long time. So there are definitely great benefits to making such a substantial multi-year commitment to our current partners. Provides a lot of stability and flexibility to our partners. That was a key tenet and value and benefit for us during the early stages of COVID-19 to be able to provide stability to our partners by continuing our funding commitments through these 4 years. But there's also some challenges within a 4-year funding commitment. It is difficult as a grant maker to remain nimble and addressing changes in community conditions when a substantial part of our funding in the community is committed through those 4 years. And so we are at a place where United Way has had a lot of changes, and there's been a lot of changes, I think, both in our country and in our community and in United Way over these last 4 years. Just some of the things that we would call out include, a change in the federal administration, which brings new priorities and potentially new resources for social sector efforts. Obviously, in the last 4 years, we've dealt with the last 18 to 19 months of COVID-19 and what that's meant for changes in community conditions and changes in the need for services and the ways that families access services, and substantial change at United Way, including the hiring of our new president and CEO, Moira Weir, who's been with the organization for about 18 months now. But some things haven't changed for United Way. One is clearly our vision and focus around supporting family economic well-being throughout our region. For those of you who've been with United Way for a number of years, you know that we've significantly changed our focus maybe 7 or 8 years ago to start to bring even more attention to poverty reduction efforts. And as we talk about family economic well-being, I just want to call out that these are still poverty reduction efforts. It's just a slight change in our framing to be more solutions focused around family economic well-being, rather than have our language being really challenge focused around poverty as a centralized issue in our language. But still focused on poverty reduction, and working towards this vision that all families in our community deserve family economic well-being. I think you'll find that many of the values and principles that drive our work will look really familiar to you. I think the last year and a half of working through kind of the rapidly changing community conditions caused by COVID-19 allowed us to kind of revisit and recommit to these values and principles. And so what you'll see through this work and other efforts of United Way is that we really are laser focused on, responding quickly to changing community needs, being flexible and lean, because we believe it'll help maximize impact in the community, working to build trust with community and with our investors, relying on data, leading through innovative efforts, applying equitable and inclusive approaches in all of our work. But probably the biggest change, which is kind of subtle and behind the scenes, has been to our theory of change. And so for the better part of 2 decades, United Way's theory of change has said that we believe we can best contribute to community level change by focusing on 2 key drivers of change: systems change and some version of either supporting strong programs or improving programs. And over the last year and a half, through a lot of work with our board and staff leadership, we've made a significant change to that theory of change to say we know that if we're going to have impact at a community level, we need to be focused everything that we do on systems change. And so we elevated systems change as the primary driver of United Way's theory of change. And that's not to say that we won't be funding programs and supporting programs, or we won't be looking for ways to improve programs. But it is to say that we know we need to be much more intentional in driving connections between our grant making, which supports strong organizations and strong programming, and those systems change goals that we believe we can achieve together as a portfolio. And the reason we believe we need to take a systems change approach is that we know that the issues holding families back, the challenges holding families back, are seemingly intractable. They're complex. They're rapidly changing. They're interconnected. And while strong programs that support individual needs of families or family members are important for addressing sort of the symptoms of those root causes, we know that if we're really going to drive community level change, that collectively we have to dive into root causes. We know that rarely is it one program, service, or organization that can solve root causes alone. And that's where we think the power of United Way comes in, to bring even more focus across our portfolio to our collective efforts on how we address root causes. How do we move beyond just laying over broken systems and really dive into fixing the foundations by addressing root causes? To do that, we have to focus on systems change. So what do we mean by systems change? Well, we're looking for efforts that are intentionally seeking to address root causes that limit economic mobility and get in the ways of families achieving economic well-being. Oftentimes, system change efforts are seeking to disrupt patterns or trends in systems. They look to alter system structures or build and improve upon relationships within systems, or to transform values or mental models. So what are some examples of each of those things? We're really looking at, kind of change across three levels: structural change, relational change, and transformative change. Oftentimes, structural change can be really explicit to say, we know if we can improve upon this policy or how this, government funding rule works, that'll provide better access to resources. We believe if we adopt common practices and best practices across programs, we can have a systems level impact and beyond even a program level impact. That if we can change up eligibility for a program or for a funding source, that we can have a better resource flow to make sure that available resources better flow to the people that need it. A relationship change is sometimes looking at how do we build better connections within systems? How do we address power dynamics? You'll see here an example of, can we operationalize person-centered approaches that shift power dynamics between providers and participants? And we know that mental models can be really important. Building community will for policy change, helping to drive greater funding to certain issues, thinking about ways that we're addressing programs that raise awareness or allow us to bring a different approach across a variety of projects. So we'll have more specific examples of where we feel there's opportunities to draw intentionality between programs and systems, but just wanted to give you a sense of what we mean by systems change examples. So all of that brings us to this current funding opportunity, what we're calling the call for systems change partners. So we're seeking to fund a diverse portfolio of systems change partners, and these will be partners that we believe can leverage their existing services and programs to advance shared systems change opportunities. These will be specifically systems change opportunities that are addressing the root causes holding families back from achieving economic well-being. And a big change for us in this funding is traditionally our funding has been program focused. And we are changing that to be organizational focused. So these will be organizational level grants that can be used to support existing programs, but also used to support organizational capacity to engage in portfolio level systems change efforts. The grants will be for 2 years, and they'll be unrestricted organizational funding, so they can be used flexibly within organizations to support programs and support multiple programs, and they can be used flexibly to support organizational capacity. The funding will begin on July 1st, 2022, and we'll make a 2-year funding commitment. So the funding commitment will expire June 30th, 2024. We will make a 1-year commitment to a set amount, and that will happen in March of next year for those organizations that will receive funding through this. And the 1-year amount we expect to be in the range of $25,000 to $750,000. So that's for 1 year. The second year of funding will be contingent upon United Way's fundraising results in 2022. So the availability of resources from United Way will determine the level of funding that each of the organizations receive for the second year of their commitment. But if we achieve the same level of success in our fundraising, we would expect that the second year of funding to be at a sustaining level, to be the same level as that first year. So again, some fairly big changes for us in this is that we will really only be looking for 1 grant application and be making 1 grant per selected partner. but that grant can be used across multiple programs and to support organizational capacity. A lot of flexibility in how the funding can be used. And while the range is not a hard cap or minimum, this is where we expect most grants to range on an annual basis, $25,000 to $750,000. So with that, let me turn things back over to Amy. Amy's going to walk us through a little bit more about the goals and priority areas for this funding, and talk a little bit more about the details on application, the type of information we'll be looking for, and how you can start your response. So with that, take it away, Amy.
Thanks, Mike. So as Mike shared, what we want to do is, before I get into some of the more detailed, I want to clarify what our goals are of this grant making process. And these goals really help drive the ultimate design that you're going to be seeing today and in the packet, as well as some of the nuance of the types of questions we'll be asking throughout the process. One key sort of design and goal of this grant making process is to make sure that throughout the process, it's stakeholder driven, and really thinking both about stakeholders as partners, community partners and organizations, as well as community residents, right? To be able to have opportunity to provide input and perspective on not only where you see challenges that should be turned into systems change opportunities, but also throughout the process moving forward of contributing to co-creating solutions together and really designing the ultimate engagement process among those that are funded. A second goal then is, sort of in that spirit of co-creation and working together, is really to focus on strengthening links. So how can we use this funding opportunity to build more effective coordination, capacity across our sort of system of nonprofit care, to connect insights, really leverage our innovations and our solutions so that we can come to different solutions together, ultimately with that last goal to accelerate systemic change. Find those opportunities that are really primed for change right now, right? We know sometimes systems change opportunities are really far out, and we might not have the right will or capacity or sort of urgency to tackle them. So we want to lift up those that are most prime and then really bring assets together so that it's not just one organization working on it. It's just not United Way working on it or a partner working on it, but we're really finding ways to work together to leverage assets to accelerate that change. And hopefully you see these goals sort of shown throughout the design and throughout this process. Before we get into more details, I want to level set on eligibility. This opportunity may not be right or a good fit for everyone. So here are the top sort of most important eligibility factors to keep in mind. It is open to 501c3 or other tax exempt entities, as well as groups or collaboratives that operate similar to a nonprofit organization. We've had a lot of questions about this. Particularly organizations that may have their own services as well as be connected in collaboratives, and have shared, and will share this information at the end. Really encourage you to reach out to us. Oftentimes it's helpful to have a more specific conversation about your situation to know, the best way to sort of come into this application process. Additionally, this is going to be for organizations that have existing programs or services, ultimately that serve a majority of folks within United Way's Greater Cincinnati footprint. So if you are a brand new organization or have all brand new programming, this is likely not a good fit, particularly because it's designed to leverage the existing capacity of services in order to contribute to that system change, and won't necessarily provide the supports to help really cultivate new work. We do anticipate of having some other opportunities later in 2022 that would be a better fit for that type of program. And the last eligibility is really critical, is that sort of building on that it builds upon existing capacity, that we're looking for organizations that can demonstrate an ability to make tangible contributions to system change, and really importantly, want to be part of collaborative efforts to make those change. So want to go at it with others and believe that you bring assets and expertise to the table that can contribute to that. So what do we mean by contributing to system change? While we recognize that systems change can take a lot of different shapes, and you've heard some of that from the examples that Mike shared, it can look very different. What we've done is provided 3 categories that we think are pretty common ways in which nonprofits have been and are, right, contributing to system change. And we wanted to lift those up to give you some example and context of how you might think of your own contributions. So one of those is deepening understanding. Nonprofit organizations are often very close to the folks that you seek to support through your services, as well as embedded in community. And those insights, that information, that deep understanding of both community challenge and community strengths is critical to deepening our understanding of the systems and finding ways to advance systemic change. So that might be one way that you would be interested or have capacity to contribute to a change through qualitative or quantitative data or insights around sort of community challenge, strengths, assets. The second is around testing innovations. So similarly, oftentimes nonprofits have the ability to be very flexible and nimble, to be innovative, to sort of be applying either best practices, sort of budding innovations in the field, or maybe designing your own solutions. And you might see yourself as being able to serve as a proof point that then could be spread or scaled, or perhaps could be really able to lead to other systemic change that addresses sort of one of those components of the systems, right? Sort of the structural components, perhaps relational, right? Perhaps you have innovations on how to cultivate brand new partnerships or innovative ways of working with others, or could address other stakeholders in the system. And the last sort of category that we've named is mobilizing advocates, really thinking about nonprofit partners and community partners' ability to really drive community will building, spread awareness, so that more people have a deeper understanding of the challenge or solutions that are really leading to systemic change. Or this could be in more traditional sort of formal advocacy roles. And like I said, we know that there are lots of different shapes. So we have an other category as well, that if you feel that your contribution doesn't necessarily fit in one of these boxes, there is space to share with us what that contribution is and what it will look like. I'm also going to come back to provide a couple more really specific examples of how you might talk about contributions through an example of what we're calling sort of the systems change opportunity a little bit later on. In addition to those eligibility requirements, we also have provided some priority areas. And we know, so just like systems change comes in a lot of forms, that there are an abundance of groups and efforts throughout our region that are contributing or can contribute to system change. And based on the funding available, we will not be able to fund all applications. So we have provided what the 4 priority areas will be looking for to prioritize applications for funding. I'm going to talk through these really briefly and want to note that there is a pretty lengthy appendix. It might not be very engaging, but there's a lot of content in there in the grant overview packet that's available on our website. And within that appendix, there are much more detailed definitions for each of these terms that I'm about to sort of talk through, as well as examples of case studies or applications of the work in nonprofit settings, and there's a short other sort of resources if you want to dig in a little bit deeper to understand what some of these mean. The first priority area is focused on, that you have existing services that have measurable outcomes that are focused on promoting the well-being of families with low incomes, or are working within historically under-resourced communities. And that promoting economic well-being, we take a fairly global view at what it takes from research and evidence, what does it take to build more likelihood of economic mobility and to achieve economic well-being. And those domains and sort of building blocks have not shifted. I am going to speak more specifically to sort of like what's the same in this funding process for partners who have been funded or are funded by us, and what's different. And one of the things that's the same is really our measurement framework around economic well-being, financial stability, and sort of those key building blocks. So you're going to see within the packet building blocks sort of along the areas of basic needs, health and wellness, quality education throughout life, and services that contribute to financial stability. The second priority area that we're focused on is sort of that organizations can demonstrate this use and sort of practice of being family-centered. We've introduced this term through our last funding cycle, although many organizations were already well aware and deeply engaged in family-centered practices, but looking to see how those are really baked into how your organization works and provides services. Like, how do you lift up family voice? How do you provide family-driven services and really allow families to have autonomy? How do you think about providing services to one or more individuals within the context of their family, and recognizing that we are often part of family units, however those are described or defined by us, and that's really critical to thinking about long-term well-being. Similar to that is sort of this practice of being community-based. So how does your organization really think about community-based approaches to guide how you engage with community? How do you provide active opportunities, ways to really actively engage community residents in your organization's work? And lastly, we have a priority area around inclusive practices, and really looking for organizations that seek to limit some of the barriers that may get in the way of folks accessing your services, and that you seek to provide culturally responsive programming and services. Within the RFP, within the letter of opportunities, or that first step, we recognize that there's oftentimes funding that comes with restrictions or guidelines or things that end up becoming sort of eligibility requirements. We recognize that, and there's going to be plenty of space for you to be able to specifically respond to things that might be barriers that are ultimately driven based on funding, and to talk about still how you might work to mitigate those, if you're in a situation where they're mandated. Okay, so shared a little bit about sort of top line what's really important, eligibility as well as priority areas. So let me speak to, before I get into the details of what this funding process will look like, there's a few key steps that I want to be able to talk through, and then we'll get into the details of the current application that's going to be opening next week. But let me talk about like what's the same and what's different. So I've already shared this, and you heard Mike share this as well. United Way has continued to focus on sort of making sure our families and regions and individuals in our region can thrive, and using sort of the North Star of poverty reduction or economic well-being is our framing that is more opportunity strength-based rather than being challenge-based. Those building blocks below that, what does it take to get towards economic well-being, are the same. They continue to be building blocks again around basic needs, financial stability, quality education, again, through life, thinking early education, all the way through learning opportunities after high school, and then health and wellness. And similarly, within our grant making, our standards are, we're maintaining the same standards. So we have standards around impact. We're seeing that we're looking for partners that have individually demonstrated impact, and then together we will work to demonstrate impact. Alignment to the priorities that we've just shared, and a focus on really systemic change, which is a key alignment with this funding process. We're going to have standards around accountability to make sure that partners, as well as United Way, are strong stewards of investments of community members that are funding and supporting this work, and that we're going to learn together. So learning was a newer grant standard that was added in the most recent funding cycle that we have launched in 2018. And we're going to continue to hold that to be a standard, because we know we need to, as Mike shared, the world is changing very rapidly, and it's critical that we make sure that we are learning together and learning quickly to be able to keep up with changes and adapt. So there are some things that are going to look different, and I'll tee it up with this slide and then speak much more specifically about how this difference is going to show up in the process moving forward. You've heard this, say it one more time. We're moving away from being sort of challenge-based, so whether we think about that from a sort of just deficit language or sort of trying to tackle the issue of poverty, to really being opportunity-focused, both in our framing of building economic well-being, but also in the process. So if you have taken the time to read the grant information packet and overview, you're not going to see United Way listing out very, very specific challenges as we have often done in the past and what is often practice of grant makers, right? In most cases, a grant very specifically says, any type of request for proposal process or application will say, we want to invest in like this specific challenge or this specific strategy. How can you do that? We're shifting this year to really focus on opportunities, and those opportunities will be lifted up by you as well as community members to decide how might we best align United Way's funding around opportunities to make systems level change. Although we are providing individual, right, organizational funding, you've heard Mike share that, we're really focused on creating portfolios of funded partners. So in the past, when we would look at an application, oftentimes we were looking at those very individually, right? Does this one organization, align? Do they have demonstrated impact? And we will be looking at that, but from a lens of how do we create a portfolio that will complement each other to drive the change. So it's a shift to really thinking about this as not one-on-one relationships from United Way and a grantee, but really thinking about portfolio of partners that can bring their strengths together. And that sort of goes to the next line as well, around instead of just looking at programmatic alignment, because these will be unrestricted organizational capacity supports, we're really going to focus on organizational alignment, understanding how sort of your organization operates and how you align to these priority areas as an organization. And then another big change, particularly for currently funded partners, is you will not see a space to add individual targets, right? We're going to ask about your services and programs. We want to understand that or give you room to talk about it. But what we're going to be looking to build together is really portfolio level outcomes and impact targets that no one individual will be, although we'll be sort of responsible for contributing to that, together we'll be responsible for making change over two years on the opportunity. And so with that comes a little bit of a shift from linear program models, which program logic models, which many partners have and are critical to day-to-day operations of services. But together, we'll really be focusing a little bit higher level on understanding what is our theory of change, how does that align with sort of a really broad system change theory that United Way has shifted to and sort of honed, and Mike spoke to that, sort of moving towards that one driver of driving system change. And we recognize that that's going to be an adaptive process, right? A theory is a theory. If we had solutions to poverty, we would be able to implement them in a minute. But we're really focused on thinking about how do we put those theories on paper, how do we test them, and how do we adapt along the way. So let me share a little bit about then how both the goals of the grant making and how some of those two froms are showing up in the actual grant making process. For folks that have engaged with United Way or maybe have followed us, you may be aware of our use of human-centered design thinking and how we use that to often approach building new solutions. So human-centered design sort of flips it. It says instead of coming in with the solution, it sort of is a process and a series of tools that encourage people to really sit in the, I always say, sort of sit in the issue or challenge and take the time to really empathize and understand the experience of others. And then from that, really define where there's opportunity to work and then move into creating solutions. So we'll be roughly doing that process within this grant making effort. The first step, sort of phase one, is going to be about understanding those system change opportunities. And you'll be able to share your perspective of that through this first application, should you choose to apply and think it's a good fit for your organization. And that's going to be this letter of opportunity. Information during this first stage, both from community members and from stakeholders, from nonprofit or partner community stakeholders, are going to be used to then help us define what the systems change opportunities are, what are we going to align this funding around, and then understand potential partners for each of those. Partners that are aligned to those systems change or show strengths and the ability to contribute to those specific system change opportunities are then going to be invited back to complete a more full request for proposal. And ultimately, at this point, we see this more as making sure it's the right fit. And so if you are invited back to complete the request for proposal application, at that point, the likelihood of being funded is very high. It's more of a fit, and we'll be at that time providing more details of funding range to make sure this sort of seems right, ultimately to make decisions in March of 2022. And then together, these portfolios of partners that will be coming around specific system change opportunities will then work together to say, what is our 2-year goal? How are we each contributing to this, to set sort of deliverables and to define the way in which we're going to work together. So here's what this process looks like with a little bit more visual to it. Again, phase one is sort of what we're starting now. This is the step in the process that we're seeking to really use qualitative and quantitative data from both community members and from partners throughout the community to understand, what do you see as critical challenges holding folks back from achieving economic well-being? How can those be turned into systems change opportunities? And who should be at the table to do that? So we'll be launching a community insights process, which will be both a survey, an online survey. We know it's not going to reach everyone. It's not going to be the perfect process, but it'll be an opportunity to provide some community insight into this effort, as well as doing some one-on-one interviews with community members to supplement that survey. And then through your letter of opportunity, all of these provide a narrative to lift up system change. We're going to pull all that information together. So we'll be gathering that through sort of into November, and then into late November and December, we'll work to synthesize it and look at where do we see existing alignment. Importantly, there may be existing gaps that are just as critical to address. There could be themes, right? There could be very niche systems change opportunities depending on the geographical area or the population that you work with. But it could be that there's some trends across some of these that are worth pulling together as an opportunity. And this will help us define what the specific opportunities are and then drive invitations for partners to join aligned to some of those. Just for this visual clarification here, this is illustrative. We don't believe there's only going to be 3 opportunities. As I shared, we do think that the opportunities, the way in which we define those opportunities is going to be different. It's not necessary. It's not going to just be because it was said, this was listed the most. It's not a popularity contest here. It's going to be about understanding diversity, understanding where there are sort of prime opportunities, and we'll also be complementing some of this information with our own knowledge of partners and the community. Then in January, after these sort of key opportunity areas are selected and defined by us, we'll then be extending those invitations out for partners to be aligned to one of those and see if it's sort of the right fit to apply for the final funding, with funding decisions to be made in March of 2022. We also plan to be very transparent with this process, and will provide other ways for folks to engage in seeing the data and exploring the process that we'll use to synthesize it, to analyze it, so that you understand sort of as much as possible the sort of thought process and analytical synthesis process that went behind these decisions in January. So I rattled off a few dates and wanted to just come back to those and list these out to ensure that folks are sort of clear on the next steps. And at the very, very end, we'll make sure you're clear on even the most important next steps to move forward. But here's just some key dates to keep in mind. This is our final introductory webinar today. We'll be posting a recording of this along with the slide deck that you're seeing today on the same page where you can find the grant overview and information packet, which is uwgc.org/funding. May have that up today, may actually be tomorrow morning, along with some other details. So we're going to be posting some FAQs that have been compiled throughout this webinar series, as well as a template if you want to get a head start, sort of a Word template of the application if you want to get a head start on completing some of the narrative. The system will not, the online system that we use that's called EC Impact, that will not open until next Monday. So we're just tweaking this. We wanted to make sure we can provide additional information to clarify questions throughout that. And so it will open up on the 18th. If you are not a current user, at the very end of this, we'll show you how to find that how to get into that system, and then how to, there will be resources, more specific tutorial guides sort of in paper and a little video on how to access it so that you know where to go. The application is then going to close on November 22nd at roughly midnight. I always like to say those staff will not be available after 5, so get your questions in early, and there's going to be plenty of opportunity to connect with me and other folks on the team as you explore this opportunity and work to complete the application. Then we're going to do a review process, follow up as needed, begin to synthesize all that information to then in January provide sort of definition announcements of those system change opportunities that are chosen to align the funding around, along with invitations to partners to complete a request for proposal application, which will allow 6 to 8 weeks to complete that, although and do plan on making it a fairly minimal second step, just likely refinement, with final grant decisions being made in March. Okay, so now into the details. Let me talk through what the letter of opportunity application actually looks like, and then I want to provide a couple examples of system change opportunities, how you might want to think about those. They might be examples that get you to think differently about opportunities you may see, and then we'll be able to open up for questions and any other discussion. So I like to think about the application really in 2 major chunks of information. One is just information about your organization, and then it'll be information about system change opportunities. So in asking about your organization information, we have tried to narrow it down to say, what is critical pieces of information that will be helpful and will be actively used in making decisions throughout this grant making process. And that's some basics about your organization. Mike shared early on that we're really seeking to fund a diverse set of partners that can work together in portfolios, and we're thinking about diversity in all different aspects. So some of these information, such as your size, your length of tenure in the community, understanding a little bit about your operations, is going to help us think about domains of diversity. We ask about leadership, just for contact information, and again, diversity to understand board, chair, and executive CEO or executive director demographics. And then we're going to ask upfront about your funding request. We have put this a little bit differently so that we have sort of a funding request, and this would be for an annual grant amount. And then we've also asked, in case they are different, we've also asked you to supply us with what we're sort of calling your minimal funding required request. we understand that in order to participate and to contribute in this type of setting and grant making process and collaborative effort, that it takes one capacity for you to have a certain level of support for your core programs or services that you can leverage to contribute. And we recognize it also takes staff time, right? So wanted to know that, in the case that you might have a ideal funding request that may be a stretch or maybe adding something new, to also supply to say, for us to be at the table, to be partners, to be able to have continuity in our services at the level we think is appropriate to contribute, and to have staff capacity to be present in some, meetings and deliverables, that here's what it's going to take. And that's really how to think about that minimal funding required request. Then from an organizational perspective, we're going to ask you just to share an overview of your current programs and services. This is going to be fairly broad for comprehensive organizations. And so it's going to be a description. We do not need to go in too deep. And then you'll be able to provide some sort of check marks, some other things that help us sort of categorize and understand the types of services you provide and the types of outcomes that you're best aligned with and currently tracking, that are all connected to our measurement framework around economic well-being. And these are check boxes: geographical area, primary outcome area, and your strategy areas. You will not need to be setting targets at this time. And the last bit of narrative that's at an organizational level is around these priority areas. So there is space for you in each area to provide a narrative around, how you align to promote economic well-being, how you're family-centered, community-based, and how you use inclusive practices. And in 2 of those spaces, there are required templates. The questions that will be asked in these templates are within the packet already, and we'll be providing you the example of the template. But the promoting economic well-being is primarily some data, some understanding of who do you typically work with, from looking at participants from their household income, using sort of some ranges around financial federal poverty guidelines, understanding some racial demographics of folks that you work with, and zip codes, looking at where you work, as well as providing some examples of your outcomes, although it's just a couple. And then the last one is a template around inclusive practices. We're asking folks to share if your organization has a non-discrimination policy, and if not, that there's space to provide some details on why you may not have that. And then the other two areas will be optional uploads, that if you'd like to have sort of complementary documents, you can upload those as well. Not required at all, and we provide some examples of what you may consider to upload in the packet. So that is all about sort of you, your organization. And the second part of the application is really about your perspective on system change. And so we are asking everyone to share at least one system change opportunity that you think is really critical for United Way to align funding around, and has opportunities for others, yourself and others, to contribute to. But you may offer up to 3 if you have multiples. There's space to do that. And then for these system change opportunities, we're really asking you to also share some references. So who are other folks who's, do you have someone that's a community member, or perhaps a previous recipient of your services, a staff member who's not on your executive team, maybe a little closer to the ground, and perhaps a volunteer, someone who's a volunteer leader or volunteer with your organization, who can help provide other perspective or a deeper perspective of your system change opportunity. And these references, should you provide them, there's space if you have challenges for that, to share why. But should you provide them, we're going to be inviting them to share their insights through that general community survey, as well as in some cases, if it's appropriate, to follow up and pick their brain a little bit more through some short interviews. For the system change opportunity, again, at least 1, up to 3 we're asking you to sort of answer the following questions or fill in the following information. And these are where I'm going to provide you 2 examples right after this to give you an idea of what these might look like. One is we're asking you to sort of give it a title. So try to really briefly, in less than a sentence, a couple words, right, sort of summarize what you see as the opportunity, to then go into more detail about, what is it, why do you think it's a prime opportunity to act on now, what informed your perspective on this system change opportunity. And we want to know then your perspective on what assets and strengths can you bring in order to contribute. And thinking back to that slide that I talked about what that means to contribute to system change, thinking about it in, are you able to sort of leverage your programs and your knowledge of the community that you work with to deepen understanding? Do you already have programmatic interventions going on or approaches that you're using that you really feel like are innovative and could be spread, and so you can serve as sort of an innovator within the portfolio? Do you have a large network or do you have strong connections or relationships that you think could be critical to mobilize advocates around this topic? And again, there's always that other. So if you don't feel like you fit in any one of those, you can share sort of select other. And then there's opportunity to share more detail about that and provide examples or illustrative, some more sort of color to how you might contribute. And then I shared that we're not asking any individual program to share targets. We're asking you to actually share sort of a system change target. So if you take the lens of, if funding was aligned to this issue or this opportunity, and critical change could be made in a 2-year, 2-year period, what would that look like? So this is your opportunity not to just say your personal, target, but to say, if we were to come together, a group of organizations with United Way were to come together around this system change opportunity, here's what I think a realistic 2-year goal or outcome would be. And then to share on that, who needs to be at the table. So if it's really critical from your perspective that in order for this to be really moved forward, you would have to have certain players or specific organizations at the table, you'll have a space to provide that. And then you have just an other box again, in case there's anything you missed or you wanted to share more perspective or insights on the opportunity. So here's what this could look like. And note that the 2 examples I'm going to share really quickly are illustrative. They're intentionally brief. You will have more opportunity in the narrative sections, although we do hope the titles are sort of brief, to give more insight to your opportunity. This was just so it fit on the slide. So one is an example, and we're going to talk about this here in a second, but we hear about systems change opportunities and efforts every day from community partners. It's very rare that we engage with someone who's providing services in the community and that provider or individual doesn't start talking about, well, in addition to what we do, we really need to fix X. And this is an example of that. So several years ago, a community partner really said, we need to fix this issue with how Kentucky in particularly was defining work requirements in order for folks to be eligible for child care benefits. And, they sort of shared that, what was happening is that individuals that were in a sort of supportive housing environment with on-site child care were having to, and they were in post-secondary, some type of a school, at least part-time, they were just having troubles with the bandwidth, right? They were having to have a fairly full class load, figuring out not only when to go to class, but how to make time for homework. And on top of that all, were having to work a full-time job in order to access the child care benefits so that their children could be in safe and educational environments throughout the day, providing them the time to, do school and engage in all those activities. And the partner said, there is no way, from our perspective, the state probably understands the implications of this. So they really lifted up a contribution of very deepening understanding, and I would say likely also mobilizing advocates So you're going to be asked to choose one of those categories, even if, and we anticipate to see that oftentimes folks probably see their ability to contribute in multiple ways. But they said, we can give data on this. We can get data on how many these parents who are also students in post-secondary settings are in some cases choosing to drop out of their classes just to be able to maintain work so that their kids can be in great environments until they start more traditional education in kindergarten, and we can story bank some of their examples, but we really think we can mobilize some deeper understanding of this and get state and people in power right to explore broadening the definition so that this is not unintentionally getting in the way of people from being successful and earning degrees that are going to open up all new doors for financial stability, right? Higher wages in ways that would often may give them the resources to actually not need to lean on public benefits anymore. And so, right, if I was to think about this retroactively and say, how would I put this into the form that we provided for you in the letter of opportunity application, it might look like this. That targeted impact could be, to us together with other partners. We think what's realistic in 2 years is to build this case to, provide alternative language revisions to eligibility. And we think we can at least in that 2 years probably provide some, identify who's going to be our champion to introduce this as a change in the law. And then here's an example again of who may have been identified as partners. We work closely on this issue along with other community partners. And so it could say, we need United Way, we need policy partners. Perhaps we can tap into a network of similar types of providers throughout the state to really build some momentum around this change. And this change was a great example of systemic change from a structure perspective because the law was ultimately expanded to recognize coursework in post-secondary as a work requirement for childcare benefits. Let me give you another example. If this was in sort of framed in some work that United Way is managing in close partnership with community partners and job and family services. And this is more about that sort of both structural and sort of implicit when it comes to relationships, thinking about changes in relationships in the system. And if I was to title this, I would call it improved flexibility and sort of broadening access to state and federal financial resources really through collaboration. So many of you know this very well, that federal and public benefits often come with a slew of restrictions that are written into law and are very difficult to change. But we also recognize that in addition to those sort of mandated requirements, it's really easy that sometimes the implementation efforts, the policies and the practices at a local organization or a program level sort of setting can also get in the way and create additional barriers, right? So there could be additional barriers with really specifically how the application process is implemented. Could be that there's clunky language, it's really difficult for folks to understand simply whether they are eligible or not. And oftentimes there's challenges around just knowing who to talk to. So United Way's Project Lift, again, was cultivated in close partnership with Hamilton County Job and Family Services and intentionally brought a diverse network of community partners together, was really aimed to make changes in that. One, by adjusting policies and sort of local practices at Hamilton County Job and Services around the application process for a certain type of funds, PRC dollars, but it was also meant to make change by building intentional relationships across what we often refer to as non-traditional partners. So who are community partners, many times faith-based organizations that have deep trust within community that may not have sort of the social service network or knowledge to really help folks navigate these complex systems? And can we build a network that broadens the access and makes accessing these really easier and connects in sort of these connectors to community who may not always be within the community? And our targeted impact, right, is sort of how do we build case studies, how do we build replication tools so that this innovation, this policy, this sort of practice change and sort of network building isn't just isolated to Hamilton County, but how could we spread it across our region? That could be our 2-year targeted impact. You know, how do we create a replication study or a toolkit perhaps so that we could explore, you know, sort of spreading this innovation. But to do that, we would need partners, right? So we would need to engage the current partners. We would need to engage and explore, you know, other community partners who may already have stronger working relationships with those public offices in different areas in order to really be successful at making change in this system's change opportunity. So those are just 2 examples. Those are by no means meant to be what you need to align to. There is some comments here that they do see, they both have somewhat of policy. The second was really meant to be more about practices. So although the example does use, you know, a public partner as part of those practice change, it was also recognizing practice change among nonprofit and sort of non-traditional partners. So we do think if you go back to that sort of upside down triangle or our analogy around sort of disrupting patterns or trends, really thinking about altering structures, which structures can be things like policy or how resources are flowing. Structures could be things like eligibility, but they can also be things about practices, about relationships, and around values. So it is fairly broad, and this is where we're going to have opportunity that if you want to talk through it, just that sort of translate sort of your thoughts into perhaps sort of these questions, we can provide support around doing that. We won't be able to like finally vet your application, but we will be able to have conversations to say, you know, here's what you're saying, here's how I would translate it into an opportunity and perhaps even to considering your contribution. Before we get into questions, I just wanted to see if I'm going to take a look at Q&A, but I wanted to pass it to Mike for some additional perspective on sort of that question. Like, what do we mean by system change opportunities? What are we sort of anticipating to see?
Yep, thank you, Amy. So a couple of questions that we've had in other sessions that kind of relate to that. I mean, first was we had several people observe that the examples that we gave are very brief. Is that the level of detail we're looking for? When the application opens up next week, you'll see that there are word counts within those questions around system change opportunities that allow for more detail in those examples. So these were kept brief just for the presentation standpoint, so we could walk through those quickly. There'll be opportunities for you to dive a little bit deeper into where you see those opportunities and kind of expand on your description of those. The other question we got, which was similar to the question about, you know, these are very legislative based. You know, we had the question and others of, you know, these seem a little bit maybe more finite, a little bit more micro level than what others might have anticipated when they were thinking about systems change. And I would say, you know, we are open to you describing opportunities across a wide range of system opportunities, right? So as Amy said, there'll be opportunities within the letter of opportunity to describe up to 3, and that can be, you know, macro level systems change on down to something that is a very finite. If we could just change this one policy, if we could just implement this one practice across partners, you know, and I think there's opportunities for range, and we're interested in that range. You know, we do want to, you know, make sure that within a 2-year funding cycle, that on, you know, larger scale systems change, that we're being really intentional about where we can make progress, knowing that we may not be able to completely solve all systems issues or systems challenges in 2 years. We would want you to think about on kind of micro level or macro level, sorry, higher level systems change efforts. Where do you see there's opportunities for kind of entry points into addressing change, and where could progress be made? And I would say in all of this, and Amy said it really well, you know, this is not built in a vacuum, right? This is built based off of the actual relationships we have with so many of our agency partners and community partners that I feel like it's become increasingly rare where we have a conversation with a partner that doesn't in some way turn towards systems change or how systems are holding back the people that we're trying to help. And just a few other examples to kind of show you what that looks like. Just in the last few weeks, I've had conversations with partners who've said, we're delivering great programs, here's results, this is what this looks like. But one of the things we're really curious about is a mindset approach that we're taking. And in this particular case, it was to do more trauma-informed care in their implementation of their program, not even necessarily in their service delivery, but kind of in the administrative side of their programming. And they said, that's great for us. We're seeing good results from it. But what really is going to create change is if we can get the word out to other organizations about what we're doing. And if we can start to talk to some of our funding sources and some of our public funding sources about what this looks like and maybe administrative changes that they could make that would be useful in bringing more trauma-informed care into their work. I had a conversation with a executive director recently of an organization that provides maybe a niche service, not a very crowded space when we think about the number of organizations that provide similar services. And they were talking specifically about overrepresentation in their clientele of African American women. And the observation that they were making in that was that there is no greater rate of need among African American women for the types of services they provide, that they're not facing the issue that they work on at any greater rates. But the systems, the public systems and the support systems that are set up to help people in this particular area aren't as attuned to the needs of African American women. And so they tend to be overrepresented in client numbers. And so, the conversation there was, yes, we can continue to provide great services, but how do we better align other systems partners, whether that's public systems partners or private systems partners or nonprofit partners, to be better attuned to those needs and better responsive overall. So we see less overrepresentation. And those are just a couple of examples of where we're seeing, kind of mindset approaches, where we're seeing relationship approaches of partners within systems. And as Amy pointed out, the Project Lift certainly can talk about, the opportunities to think about systems in terms of braiding public and private resources, but it is also about how those partners come together. How are they forming referral networks? Lots of opportunities for us to think across kind of the more explicit and implicit changes that can happen, going back to that example. What I would say, Amy will come back and make sure we've addressed all the questions that are currently in the chat. But with the few minutes we have remaining, if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A in the chat, or you can also raise your hand and we'll bring you off mute to ask your question live.
So in case folks are taking some time to consider that and to type in some new questions, we did have some that were answered along the way in the Q&A. So I'm just going to quickly run through those to make sure everyone heard those. And we will also be, again, formulating a sort of FAQ based on these webinars that we knew were sort of frequently asked questions. There was a question just to clarify of one grant per agency. And that is correct. These are organizational level grants. So this is different from the past when we have provided program level funding. So the organizational and unrestricted, and it can then be used as organizations see fit to support either one or multiple services. There was a question around geographical focus, and this was also in the chat. The question was, will funding be restricted to only those counties which are in our United Way's geographical footprint? And the answer to that is yes. We do ask that folks focus our resources on supports and system change for families specifically within United Way's footprint. And there was a question around the organization that is a system change organization, and asking because they do not have direct services, would they be eligible? And that is often, this is oftentimes difficult to give a standard question to answer this potentially, but we really encourage folks to have a conversation with us. So if you send a note to impact@uwgc.org, that gives us a space to make sure we're keeping track of these. And we'll quickly follow up with scheduling some time to have a connection, likely with me, and then there are other staff that can support your questions as well. We also will be sharing this, a copy of this recording after we have a little bit of time to clean it up, and sharing the slide deck, and those will be posted at United Way's website at uwgc.org/funding. So I have not yet seen here's one question. One last question here is, are we able to include services that are provided on site through partner organizations? And that is a great question. We have had a lot of questions around collaborative settings. And so likely helpful to have a quick conversation around that. If those services are sort of within your, are well aligned to the organization's work, then yes. There may be some cases in which there's a collaborative or a coalition or some type of group in which that work is really uniquely distinct from any one of the organization's work. And in that case, it may actually make sense to come in as organization, or have the organizations individually apply for support in addition to the collaborative. So those are harder to answer without full context. But if you are if you have a core service that is really engaged in a partnership, then that likely makes sense, right? To just bundle that up into your services and work. So want to quickly, and then we can still hang on for questions. I want to make sure for folks that may not have questions and would like a couple minutes back to their day, just want to get really clear about next steps. So later today, you're going to see some more resources on our website. And the big thing to look for is beginning Monday, October 18th, you're going to want to begin, well, it's as early as you can, begin to access our online system. That is the system called EC Impact. You'll see a little bit of a blurb in the packet that's online already on how to access this. The best way is to go to our website, particularly if you're not already a user. For folks that have active accounts in EC Impact for reporting or other funding processes, you'll be able to see your registration form in there. But if you don't, and you're new to this, you'll want to find it by going to our website, and you'll want to also probably look for an additional packet that we'll have online soon that walks you through some of the basic screenshots of it. So that begins on Monday, again, with the due date as November 22nd at the end of the day. And in between all of that time, please do not hesitate to reach out. Again, email impact@uwgc.org. So thanks again for taking time out of your day and learning more about this. We really look forward to learning and getting your perspective of what you see as system change opportunities, and ultimately, the opportunity to work together differently to really make change that addresses root causes in our community. Thanks so much.